Line height is the vertical space between lines of text. It determines how tight or loose the text appears when written in two or more lines. If the line of text is too small, the text feels cramped and difficult to read. On the other hand, if it's too large, the lines feel disconnected, making the text appear disjoint. Here's an example. The first paragraph feels a bit too tight, while the second one feels overly spaced out. Now here's the same text with adjusted line height. It feels more open, balanced, and easier to read. In the web, by default, browsers set the line height to 1.2 or let's say 120%, which means if you do not specify line height, every element, whether it's large heading or small body text paragraph, will use 120% line height. While some large paragraph might look fine at 120%, body text typically needs more line height. That said, I've noticed some designers insist on using 150% for every scenario, but the truth is, not all fonts behave the same way. Some looks better with 150%, some with 180%, and some with 110%. It's all case by case. In this video, I've tried to explain how we can treat line height in different cases and different scenarios. Number 1. Wider the text block, more the line height. In the first example, I set the font size to 16 pixels with 150 line height, which works well in this case. However, when the same font size and line height are applied to longer and wider paragraph or text, the text can start to feel slightly cramped and dense. Here, I have increased the line height to 160%. Now, the text becomes more readable and easier to read. Especially in wider layouts where the eyes has to travel further, this small adjustment improves readability and visual flow. Number 2. Serif fonts need more breathing room. When it comes to serif fonts, they naturally require more line height due to their decorative strokes. Taller accenter like H and D and deeper accenter like G and Y occupy more vertical space within the text block. If the spacing is too tight, these elements start to overlap visually, making the text feel cluttered and harder to read. In this example, I use the same font size, 16 pixels, and line height 160% as above, but it still feels cramped and dense. By increasing it to 190%, the text becomes more open and balanced and readable. Also, when working with serif fonts, it's not just about increasing line height. Slightly increasing the font size can further enhance readability, ensuring the text does not feel too tight, especially in long-form content. Number 3. Bigger the heading, tighter the line height. Here, I use font size of 80 pixels with a 150% line height. While 150% generally works for body text, in this case, it feels disconnected and overly spaced. When dealing with larger fonts, using a lower line height creates a more cohesive and visually balanced look. Instead of 150%, reducing the line height to 120% makes the text feel more structured, readable, and visually pleasing. As font size increases, line height should decrease to maintain a balance and natural flow. Larger headings with excessive line height can feel disconnected, while tighter spacing keeps them organized, structured, and focused. There's no universal rule for line height, and instead of rigidly following a rule, it's better to adjust the line height based on readability, font characteristic, and overall design aesthetic. Every fonts behave differently. Some requires more breathing room, while other works well with tighter space. The goal isn't just to follow a 1.5 or a certain rule, but to create a balanced and comfortable reading experiences. But to make things easier, here's a simple formula. Well, I don't want to complicate you with this. Let me simplify. Wider the text block, the more the line height. Serif fonts require more line height than sans fonts. The larger the font size, the smaller the line height, and vice versa. To help you see how these concepts can apply in a real project, I've created this design where I have used different line heights for various font sizes. In this design, you'll notice the larger font size at the top. Since it's a single line, I have used 100% line height. On the right, the text is set to 26 pixels with 130% line height. And below that, there's a 18 pixel font size with a 150% line height. For a larger heading, I've opted for like 120% line height to keep it more structured and balanced. Similarly, for the paragraph with 30 pixel font size, I use 130% line height, and for the one with 20% font size right here, I applied a 140% line height. Here's another page. The block page where I use a serif font in the heading. As mentioned earlier, for serif fonts, it's better to use a larger line height. So for the 96 pixel of font size, which is a serif font, I've applied a 140% of line height. For the body text, which is set to 18 pixel, I use 150% line height to ensure readability and comfortable reading experience. So this approach helps create a clear visual hierarchy while maintaining good spacing throughout the content. In the case of mobile, we apply slightly different treatment to line height and typography as a whole due to constraint of smaller screen sizes. I've covered these mobile specific typography adjustment in next video in this lesson. So be sure to check out to understand how to optimize typography for mobile design. By the way, if I've noticed, I've used two different types of font in this project, the one that I just showed. However, in my previous video, I mentioned that it's generally better to use only one font family for your web design project to maintain consistency and simplicity. Well, if you're interested in learning about font pairing, I've covered in another video. Another important aspect of typography is letter spacing, which is often overlooked by many designer, or let's say in many discussion. Letter spacing is as important as line height when it comes to web design, and I've covered this topic in the next chapter of this video, so stay tuned to learn more about how to effectively use letter spacing in your design.